I was so close. I was so...
You Pull It by Hal Stemler. How do you ever know it's really over? Haven't you been in that space before where you've broken up, at least for the record, with the love of your life, but you can't let yourself believe she won't come around somehow? Well, let me tell you exactly how you can know it's over. I don't consider myself lucky by any means, but I know it's over between me and Irene. Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it. I guess I can thank You Pull It. It's not how I wanted things to work out, God knows. I'm not kidding when I say you can find just about anything you need, or anything you even think you need, down at the big You Pull It wrecking yard over on Marysville Road. I really don't mind going down there. In fact, I like it. I'm a people watcher in my own way, and believe me, you get a lot to watch over there. I'm not an artist or anything, and I'm not going over there for a good time, but you sure do get some surprises in a place where they drop off all those wrecks. Man, I do mean surprises. I'm talking about car wrecks, of course. It's a funny idea if you think about it. I think we're smarter with our graveyards for cars than we are about our graveyards for people and the whole sick business of what we do when somebody dies. You've got the undertakers and funeral parlors, the layers of middlemen who are nothing but leeches. Do you know what they'll do with you when you keel over? I don't. Mostly I don't care to think about it. I've never really been to a funeral I liked, if you know what I mean. We're just more adult, more civilized, just smarter about what we do with cars that die. They don't just keel over, they keel into something. But when people say they totaled their car, they're talking insurance talk. It's just too damn much work for the insurance company to pay for repairs, so they call it a total. You and I know, or you do if you've ever had to fix your own car, and God knows I've had to fix a few. Anyway, you and I know most of a totaled car is still perfectly good. And if half of it is bashed in and you can't get to the parts you need on that side, you can usually find another one that's bashed in on the other side. So you've got practically a whole car willing to give you what you want. Now, if we were that rational about humans, we'd never have a problem coming up with the body parts we need to save the living, would we? And I, for one, wouldn't shed a tear for a single unemployed undertaker or anyone else who lives off other people's grief. So, picture this. Row after row of dead cars, all neat and organized for as far as you can see. But you look at it for a minute, and you realize this is no ordinary parking lot. From overhead, it probably looks like one, only somebody has dumped a bunch of junk around the cars. For sure, you'd have a hard time pulling out of this lot. You've got your old school GM boats in one section. It's mostly Mexican kids you'll see there looking for stuff for their lowriders. You got another huge section of Japanese sedans, mostly Toyotas and Nissans, but some others too. You'll find just about anybody there and a fair number of women too. Those Japanese cars look the most picked over, or maybe they just get more mangled at their moment of death. There's a smaller section with the European cars like Volvos and Saabs, some old Mercedes, the occasional Jag, but not too many Beamers. There's vans in one area and pickups in another, but the pickups are kind of separate too. American pickups here, the Fords, Dodges, and Chevys, and Japanese there. None of these cars is standing on its own wheels. When you think about it, aren't tires and wheels about the easiest things to turn over quick for cash? So these thousands of cars have their wheels removed. Somebody must sell the tires, and then the wheels that nobody wants, they set down on the gravel, pretty much where the wheels were to start with, and they plunk the wreck on them like they were 4 poles in the ground. I've seen him do it. This guy in a big yellow diesel rig, like a big forklift, slides those tongs under the wreck's belly. Then he cruises down the lane like a parking valet, only he isn't worrying too much if he dings a car or two on the way in. And he sets the carcass neatly on the 4 wheels that have been stripped of their tires. It's like being buried in somebody else's shoes, isn't it? Talk about skilled labor. I mean, when you become an expert at placing wrecks at You Pull It, what do you do next? What do you put on your resume? But I'm trying to tell you how I know it's over between me and Irene. I had to go down to the yard last Saturday because I'm down to one car. Scary, isn't it? I mean, these days, who can get by with just one set of wheels? You got one car and some morning it doesn't start, so then where are you? Not only can you not get to work, but you can't even get to the parts store to fix the car. Sure, if you have a brand new car, you're not supposed to worry about that. But I have news for you. New cars don't stay new. No, I've never had one, but I know plenty of people who have. You probably have, right? A couple of years down the road and bang, you're paying $1,200 or $1,400 to keep it running. If it's one of these Lexus or Acura type cars, they'll call it routine maintenance. If it's a regular car, they'll call it repair work, but it's a lot of money either way.
To sensitivity that could set me free. And I almost lost my nerve, now it's plain to see.
My Toyota suddenly overheated last Tuesday. I won't tell you the whole story about that, but I finally had to jerry-rig the belts to get it home. It turned out the fan assembly on the front of the engine was frozen, so the fan wouldn't turn. I quickly found out this was one of those dealer specials, guaranteed to cost you a fortune. I swear, the engineers try to put at least one of these parts on every car. This one is a fan blade mounting assembly. Nobody else makes it, and the dealer lists it at over $600. Independent shops don't complain because it's a special markup deal. Half that money is going to the shop that installs it. What can you do except to try to find a used one? After all, the shops will tell you this is a part that doesn't go bad all that often. So I head over to You Pull It to see if I can pull one off a wreck. The Toyota breaking down isn't the only reason I'm down to driving the van around town. If it were, I guess I wouldn't be telling you this story. The truth is, Irene took the Mercedes when she left me 3 weeks ago. The truth is, she stole it, because I sure didn't say she could have it. What do you call it when somebody borrows something without asking permission and has no plans to give it back? I call it stealing. Yeah, it pissed me off big time. Big time. It was a nice car. It was an '81 chocolate brown Mercedes. I don't think they really make them that big anymore, and it didn't have much wrong with it. I got it about 5 years ago when I first moved out here, and I swear I bought it from a little old lady who only drove it to church on Sundays. The body wasn't perfect, but it cleaned up real nice. The dash had seen too much sun, and I really needed to get one of those covers they make to hide the cracks and stains, but I never did get around to it. The rest of the interior was in really good condition. It had a cream leather upholstery, and while the color was worn away in a lot of places, especially in the front seats, there were no holes at all. It was intact from front to back, and the back seat was in great shape. It was better than new, really. The leather still had its color, but felt very soft to the touch, not sticky at all like some cars with that shiny, never-been-rubbed stuff that almost passes for vinyl. That back seat was Irene's favorite place to fuck. Mine too, but I wasn't as picky. We'd find a place to park, and she would tell me to roll the windows up so she wouldn't mind making a little noise. She didn't have to tell me twice. No, I didn't hesitate for a minute. I think she really liked the feel of her bare ass sliding on that worn leather in the back seat while I was pounding down into her. Yeah, she made noise all right. And I knew how to shut her up, too. That back seat was just wide enough so I could plant my feet on the armrest on the driver's side, and she would reach up with both hands and hang on for dear life to the leather loop just over the passenger window while I was doing it to her. I'd have my hands squeezing her tits, and when I moved in, I'd reach around, dig my thumbs into her armpits, and kind of grab her by the shoulder blades and work her good. When she really started moaning, I'd slide my hands down and grab her ass, and I could feel the extra heat on her skin. That's what I think she liked best about the car, sliding her hot ass on that friendly, worn leather. Anyway, she took the Mercedes. But I knew she'd be back. That didn't help my car situation, though, not to mention my love life. My Mercedes is borrowed. My pickup is boiling over, waiting for that $600 part. And I've got nothing but my big old van to drive me to the one place that always makes sense. You pull it. When I pulled into the parking lot, it was already past 2 in the afternoon, and the sun was smothered in the hot haze of a summer air inversion. I paid the $2, let him look through my small toolbox, and the plump Mexican girl stamped my hand. She smiled but didn't say anything, though she had talked up a storm in Spanish with the guys in front of me. The haze seemed to hiss and buzz. The freeway is just beyond the 10-foot cyclone fence and the ratty trailer park that backs up to it, and there's a generating plant a little further down the road. I was sweating already when I started down the first row of steel cadavers. I looked under the yellow metal awning bolted to the side of the checkout trailer to see if Coin Picker was there, but I guessed he was sleeping in today. Maybe they don't drop off any new wrecks on Saturdays. I used to see him there, lounging on a plastic chair, wearing blue denim Farmer John overalls, and I never saw him wear a shirt, even when it was cold. He was a pretty big guy, white, didn't have a lot of hair. If I hadn't talked to him once a couple of years ago, I probably wouldn't have noticed him. I still had the Volvo then, and I was looking for a better driver's seat because the one in there was killing my back. I had just started down a row of European cars when I heard the grind of the lift truck behind me. I turned around and I saw a pretty new 240 two-door towering over me. The first 3 slots in the row were empty. Don't ask me what they do with the bodies that have been so picked over there's nothing left. And I hadn't noticed the wheel rim pedestals were already in place. I moved back and the operator lowered the Volvo tenderly, dropped the forks to the ground, backed up, and disappeared. This is my lucky day, I thought, since the seat I was looking for had to come from a 2-door model so it would flip forward. This car was in great shape, and yes, the seat's upholstery was still good. I had no sooner opened the driver's side door to plan the extraction when the door on the other side swung open, and this 50-something, bald white guy with bare arms and shoulders, wearing a dirty blue Farmer John, leans in and asks if I mind him looking the car over. I said I was just taking the seat, so go ahead. His big hand immediately dove into the pouch on the back of the front passenger seat and deftly removed several coins. I was bringing the wrenches out of my travel kit, and I watched Coin Picker from the corner of my eye. Like a pair of ballroom dancers, his beefy hands waltzed along the edges of the floor upholstery, jitterbugged around the shift box and the cup holders, and foxtrotted under the passenger seat, front and then back. By now, I was staring. From every nook and cranny came pennies, nickels, dimes, and a surprising number of quarters. After he had flipped up the back seat and worked through the trunk, I insisted he shake down the front seat I was removing. In less than 5 minutes, he had pocketed a total of $7.23, all coins except for the dollar bill that had been wrapped up with the car jack. I had asked him about the total, he hadn't volunteered it, but he shared the information matter-of-factly. Volvos were generally pretty good, he said, but there probably wasn't a wreck on these 10 acres that didn't have enough petty change to buy at least a candy bar. He seemed like a nice enough guy, but I thought, my God, what is this country coming to if people are making a living ferreting coins out of old wrecks and junkyards? That's how I feel about tattoo guys, too. What is this world coming to if guys can make a living tricking people into defacing their God-given skin with smudgy abominations they call art? Tattoos didn't bother me much until Irene took up with a so-called tattoo artist. The last time I talked to her on the phone, she told me that she had met this guy named Max who did tattoos. Basically, he was doing her, too. What the fuck? She had never said anything about wanting to get a tattoo. She hung up on me before I could find out anything else. I don't remember what I said to her, but I wasn't exactly calm about it. She hadn't answered the phone the last couple of times I had called, including the night before when I had called all night, every half hour. I didn't get a lot of sleep, so I was pretty cranky, and maybe I raised my voice. I checked around and found out there was a tattoo parlor with a guy named Max in this little dive behind the video store on 14th Avenue. I staked the place out for the next couple of days and caught sight of him 3 times. He was a pretty big guy with a bright red flat top. The longest wax strand stood up from a widow's peak that marched aggressively down his forehead. Each time he was wearing a sleeveless denim vest separating 2 massive shoulders, each hung with a big meat hook of an arm. Each triceps, biceps, and forearm had tattoos, but not as many as you might expect from a creep who smears up other people's skin for a buck. The first 2 times I saw the guy, he was wearing wraparound shades. The third time, I got a pretty good look at his face. I was going to talk to him, but I gave it up. What could I say? He didn't look like a poet, if you know what I mean. It was unbelievable Irene would go for that, but there it was. She had told me herself. I walked around the end of the row by the fence, down another line of pickups, and when I turned back into the main roadway, I saw a man standing under a great white Mexican straw hat, staring at the first wreck in the next row. I walked around him, but he didn't notice me at all. I looked at him. He was dressed more for going to a rodeo than for a greasy junkyard. He was in his 40s, heavily built, starting with his face, heavy, reddish, with thin black hair and a thin black mustache. His white, collared, almost dressy shirt betrayed the beginnings of a potbelly. His new-looking jeans tapered tightly into his black cowboy boots. He was leaning on his back foot, his arms hanging straight down on both sides, his small steel toolbox on the ground next to him. He was staring at what looked like a Wagoneer, seriously smashed in on one side. What was he looking at? I found a Toyota about 4 cars in, and as I lifted the hood, I looked back. The man had not moved. Did he recognize something? Was he waiting for the car to speak to him? Was he thinking about the part he was going to remove? Or was he thinking about something totally separate?
And I almost lost my nerve, now it's plain to see.
I met Irene on a Friday night almost 6 months ago at the video store. Not the one on 14th Avenue, but the one on Child Street that carries adult movies in a back room protected by a thick black curtain. I had already had a couple of drinks at Hanley's, and I was cheering myself up with the idea of taking home a movie. I wasn't planning on picking up any porn, but there I was, backing in the direction of the black curtain with Kill Bill tucked under my arm, pretending to look at the titles in the classics section when I bumped into her. I turned around and in measured thoughts saw she was not a teenager and she was beautiful. Brown hair curved gracefully to her shoulders. I looked down and saw brown eyes, freckles sprinkled across her cheeks, a silver-mounted emerald lying on a clinging yellow jersey that held up gorgeous breasts. I saw the pockets on the back of tight jeans that swelled up with promise from the small of her back. I stopped breathing. It felt like my arms were already around her waist. I sensed no panic, no embarrassment in my own unreliable thoughts. The rest of the evening was a movie, and I was in it. I spoke to her. I don't remember what I said. She spoke to me. She was smiling. I was smiling. She was alone. We stopped looking for movies. She had pulled Bend It Like Beckham. We walked out into the parking lot. I asked her for her phone number. She laughed. We drifted out of the light over to my pickup. We were kissing. She came to my apartment. We put on Bend It Like Beckham and didn't watch it. We hooked up. It was after midnight when I took her in the Mercedes back to her car. Before we even left the parking lot behind my building, she laughed, scrambled over the headrest, and into the back seat. The Toyota's engine had already been pulled. I hoisted my toolbox and looked back. The man in the white hat was still studying his Wagoneer. I kept walking. The endless rows of wrecks have a hypnotic effect after a while. You start to lose your grip on what part you were looking for and which cars might harbor it. I found myself looking at models I had parted with years ago. Sometimes I'd look inside cars for no reason other than sick curiosity. When a front end is smashed in like that, what happens to the people inside? Let's see how far the steering column has been rammed through the driver's seat. I have become a junkyard voyeur. What kind of person would own an early 80s Jag? Let's take a peek inside. There certainly will be clues. A cracked high-endurance deodorant stick on the back seat floor. The indestructible package of a bag of Reese's peanut butter cups. With the candy gone, still the brightest star in a constellation of trash in the coverless trunk. The artifacts of the last of this poor car's lineage of ownership and abuse. I noticed an Indian lady walking around carrying a black trash bag. Nobody stands out at U-Pullet, but when my eye caught her a second time, I looked a bit more closely. She was short and plump. Her gown covered her feet. A drape of faded purple hung over one shoulder, and a scarf covered her black hair. She was homely, with the air of a grandmother, although she didn't look that old. When I rounded another row of pickups, I saw her again. That's when it hit me. She had no tools. And what can a person carry in a plastic trash bag? It sure wouldn't hold any car parts, even if she found something already pulled and lying on the ground. Well, that made me think about Heather. I don't think about her that often anymore, even though we were married for almost 5 years. She always carried a purse the size of a suitcase, but never once did I see her reach into it or use anything from it. The only time she needed something a person might be expected to carry in a purse, tissues, a dress book, a pen perhaps, she never had it with her, not once. I started keeping track. It was like that at the end with the cell phone she got. She never had it with her. One time, when her car broke down, she had to stop a total stranger to borrow a phone to call for help. She would call me at the most irritating times with nothing to say, but she never once answered that phone when I tried to call her. She was born on the wrong planet. I guess it's a good thing we never had kids. What would that have been like? Yeah, I was surprised when she told me she was pregnant with her new man, and she had a girl within a year of our divorce. I can't picture it, but it's not my problem. I found another Toyota, but this one had its front end smashed in, and although the engine was still there, after I had removed the destroyed radiator and a couple of the bolts holding the assembly in place, I could see the shaft was probably bent, and the fan would wobble if I installed it on my car. The haze seemed to thicken with the peak of the afternoon heat. It didn't seem right to breathe it, and I was uncomfortable with feeling myself wrapped in its smother. I bent down to grab my toolbox when I was startled by a vision that appeared down the row of junked cars. 2 men had materialized out of the hissing mists as though transported through time to a portal in U-Pullet. They were large, faceless creatures, clad in dingy, yellow, grease-streaked mechanics' overalls, stooped in oxen exertion, shoulders racked against a yellow steel yoke that seemed an extension of their suits. They were dragging a lurching 2-story tower of tubular steel, teetering on 4 widely spaced, reluctant wheels. Each had draped a white t-shirt over their heads that made me think of Egypt. They might have been slaves dragging enormous stone blocks on wheelless sleds across pitted sands to build the Pharaoh's pyramids. But was there evidence of human sacrifice in ancient Egypt? Surely these drones were sent from a culture far more cruel, for a chain pulley dangled from the top center of their 4-legged spider. From the pulley hung the bleeding heart of a large car. Black blood oozed from the engine's severed aorta, and odd ventricles, valves, and vessels twitched in protest to the violent extraction. What pagan ceremony could sanction such inglorious suffering? A power plant so large surely had been taken from an American car, possibly still alive when the amputation was performed, likely with no anesthetic. Money's been the problem. The divorce ruined me financially. I guess it would have ruined Heather too if she hadn't hooked up with that guy who built the shopping center on the north side. We had more debts than assets to split up, and that's why I've been renting for the past 3 years. Being married to Heather was about as close as I've ever come to owning a new car, and it wasn't all that close. I should have sold a Mercedes this spring, but I met Irene. And now, what do I have to show for it? No Mercedes and no Irene. I couldn't accept that. I couldn't cut loose. How long could that Max creep keep her interested? She had to come back. I knew she'd be back. I must have been getting cranky since I hadn't gotten my part. It was really hot, and I only had about half an hour left before closing. But this time, when I saw the Indian bag lady, I put my tools down, walked over to her, and asked what was in the bag. I could tell she didn't speak English, and I pointed to the bag. I knew I was scaring her, but after I pointed a third time, I took it from her and looked inside. Kid clothes. There wasn't anything in it except little shirts, shorts, and even some sandals. I couldn't look at her when I gave the bag back.
That when I do get strong enough, I'm too tough to feel. And when I let those little wounds get too tough to heal, well then it really has to hurt to be real.
You wouldn't believe the crap people keep in their cars. It's not just fast food cups and trash, but coffee mugs, plates, knives, forks, spoons, chopsticks. I found a perfectly good toaster in the back of a Volkswagen once. Want to spiff up your appearance? I've seen berets, razors, hair ties, combs, brushes, neckties, bracelets, necklaces, rings. You'll find every kind of food imaginable if the rats, mice, and other wildlife don't find it first. How many times have I seen Fruit Loops glued to the upholstery with crusted milk? What goes in must come out. How many wrecks of soiled paper diapers lying around, and toilet paper in rolls, and in so many used forms. I was bent over, deep under the hood of my third Toyota, when I came up for air and saw two people walk by. They were both heavy, the same height, wearing the same ponytails, the same shorts, and the same wife-beater undershirts exposing the same pudgy arms. The one further from me had a bulge above the waistline, a stubbly jaw, and carried a small toolbox. The one closer to me bulged at the chest. They both had tattoos on their arms, but the arm closest to me looked like it had just come from the tattoo parlor. I saw at once the ooze seeping from the rusty lines of the drawing. There, glistening in the searing glare of a hot afternoon, was the suppurating image of Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the fucking Pooh. What the hell kind of tattoo is that? Hey, you know an asshole named Max? I almost shouted it out loud. I felt nauseous. What did Max burn into my sweet Irene? How did that scumbag leave his fucking mark? Where did he do his dirt? How about a nice prick? Oh, let's see. Where would be a good place to put it? Jesus Christ, I can't do this if I want her back. Do I have to say I like it? I've read there are ways to remove tattoos. From where? What if she doesn't want it removed? What do I do then? By now, I couldn't even see what I was doing. The haze had turned acid and my eyes were watering. I might have been talking out loud. Anyway, nobody else walked by for quite a while. It seemed I was turning the same down bolt for a long, long time. Okay, there's something I haven't told you yet. I borrowed a handgun Monday from this crazy guy, an ex-cop who I met when I was living in the building on Circle Drive. I mean, think about it. What kind of idiot would lend somebody a gun? But that's the kind of idiot Scott is. I knew he would do it, no questions asked. He asked me if I knew how to use it, and I lied. I don't even know what kind of pistol it was. All I knew is he gave it to me loaded. The day before I went to Upullet, I paid a visit to Max's parlor. I had cleaned myself up, and I acted real cheerful when I talked to the girl who answered the door. I asked for Max, and the girl said he wasn't there. I said he had been recommended to me as somebody who did good work. I almost choked when I thought what I should say if she asked me who recommended Max to me. I couldn't say Irene, now could I? If I made up a name and she didn't know the person, she might get suspicious. She didn't ask anything, though. I kept staring at her nose ring. It was silver, large, but very fine, and it was worked into a form that I couldn't quite make out. A mudflap girl? She just told me Max had gone to L.A. with Lydia on Monday for a week, and he wouldn't be working again until next Tuesday. Lydia? Who the hell was Lydia? I couldn't force myself to ask that, so I thanked the girl and left. I gave the gun back to Scott that evening. What the hell had I been thinking? All I knew now was that Irene had to come back. Did she know about Lydia? How can I get a hold of Irene? It wasn't over. I never believed it was over. What can I say to her to get us past this? That's what I was thinking when I gave up on the bolt. I needed to focus to get this plate off the front of the block, and I just couldn't concentrate on what I was doing. I needed to walk for a minute. A row or two closer to the farthest fence on the lot, my eyes fell upon a carcass that simply didn't fit into this graveyard. Sandwiched between a pair of typical corpses, a sweeping sculpture from another time seemed to struggle out of the fetid grime. I saw a movie once about a modernist sculptor in England who became famous not by making realistic statues, but by creating shapes of stone that suggested beautiful bodies doing elegant things. Had he done this? Being where I was, I knew it was the frame of an ancient truck, and a pretty good-sized one. All its parts had been pulled, until what remained was the essential skeleton. Two graceful black steel channels flowed in parallel from the rise in the front that once held an engine, dipping earthward in a sensual curve to where truck drivers and hitchhikers once had entered the cab. In symmetrical arcs, they rose again like bulging, polished muscles to the rear flatbed. These sleek, massive bones had been picked so perfectly clean by the vultures and vermin that ravaged junkyards, and polished by so many seasons of rain and scorching sun that they seemed ready to soar silently to the heavens, leaving lifetimes of drudgery and pretense behind in the mud. I couldn't take my eyes away from this beautiful carriage. I wanted to touch its smoothness. I thought of lying down with it and caressing its rounded flank. I may have been talking to it when the ominous growl of the car plucker interrupted. I stepped aside and the spell was broken. Hulking down the row, the yellow monster stopped on the far side of my steel channel swan, squatted next to the neighboring wreck, jabbed in its tines, and lifted it with a smooth yank. A moment later it was gone, and silence shut me in again. That's when a flash of chocolate brown scratched across my sight. I had been drifting slowly around this altar in the temple when I looked up, and somehow that color of brown stirred a memory. I knew what it had to be. I didn't walk. I ran toward it. I tripped over a monstrous carburetor that had been pulled and then rejected before payment had been made. I didn't stop to think how lucky I was not to cut my face or arms, but I could tell my knee was bleeding. A few more steps, and there was my Mercedes, freshly crossed over this river Styx, its windshield a maze of shattered safety glass. Something, and I already knew what, had been hurled forward on the driver's side with such force that a small hole had been punched clear through. I approached warily, like I thought I might frighten it away. The driver's side front fender was caved in, and shards of creosote-soaked wood were wedged between the folds of sheet metal. The door responded to my hesitant tug, and I lowered myself slowly into the seat behind what was left of the steering wheel. The sheared shaft had no handle grip, and I couldn't recognize anything I saw in the stump's center. Chunks of shattered glass were strewn about. I leaned forward and saw several spots of dried blood on the jagged rim of the hole. And there, curving gracefully from a crack on the hole's edge to the dash I hadn't gotten around to covering, was a single strand of brown hair. I wrapped my fingers around it and suddenly felt sick. I retched over the side, still careful to lean over far enough to protect the finish, so I wouldn't allow myself to blame Irene for the stain when she brought the Mercedes and her own beautiful self back to me. I couldn't sit back down. I stared at my vomit as it sank in. Yeah, it was over. Irene. I was so furious with her, I had thought more than once about killing her, even strangling her slowly with my own hands. But God, I didn't want her dead. How could she be so crazy? How could she let herself drive like that? I crawled into the back seat and curled up on the faded white leather. I could feel some of the nuggets of glass under me, but I didn't care. I laid there and bawled like a baby. I cried for Coin Picker, for the bag lady, for that guy still staring at the car, for the slaves of Egypt, for all the sorry losers who'd gotten a tattoo hoping it might change their life, for fucking Max, for Irene. Oh, Irene, and for my own sorry self. Doubt is a horrible thing, but nothing could be worse than the pit of knowing for sure it was over. Oh, yeah, no doubt, it was over. When I woke up in that back seat, it was dark. The daytime's hissing drone had carried into the night. My cheek was stuck to the leather. I had been cut. I lay still and thought about the drool and blood dried up on my face. My mouth tasted salty and I couldn't think straight. The place would be locked up and it would be just as hard to get out as it would be to break in. And that would be pretty hard, I knew. Seems like any business that deals with poor people, and I know perfectly well that people with money don't get their rocks off at auto wrecking yards, will have the most thorough and effective means for protecting their low-value goods from the desperate who covet them. Poor people don't covet expensive things. They only know to steal what is within reach. If I started wandering the yard, I would probably get chased by their dogs. I hadn't seen any today. I had heard some barking, but wasn't certain the sound came from inside the yard. I had seen enough dog shit during the day, old and crusty, and even a fresh steaming pile, to warn me there were dogs on patrol. Better I stay where I am, I thought, and I settled in to sleep out the night. I didn't dream about Irene at all that night. If I dreamt of anything, it was about being up all night at U Pullet. So naturally, I was exhausted in the morning. It had rained during the night, and it never rains in the valley in the summer. The haze was gone, but the smell of wet wrecks promised the haze would return with the heat of a summer afternoon.
I was so